It started with a cough. A harmless, quiet cough at 10:47 on a Thursday night. That's what led me to the hallway. I had been resting in bed, eyes closed, not asleep, never really asleep anymore. At 81, sleep is more like a visitor who sometimes shows up, sometimes forgets. That night, I had just finished reading the last lines of an old romance novel, worn and cracked at the spine. I had placed it on my nightstand, reached to turn off the lamp when I heard it, the cough. And then, whispers. I sat up slowly, unsure if the voices were from the television in the living room. But no, those weren't actors. That was my son's voice. And hers. My daughter-in-law. She's starting to forget things. I slipped my feet into my old slippers, the ones Paul bought me 30 years ago, and moved quietly toward the cracked door. The hallway was dark, only a sliver of light coming from the living room. I didn't mean to snoop, but the sound of my name stopped me in my tracks. Your mother. She's starting to forget things, Alan. I know, he said, exhaling like he had carried a weight all day. It's just not safe anymore. We can't keep living like this. What if she leaves the stove on again? Again, I clenched my jaw. That happened once. One time, last winter. I had turned it off late, but nothing burned, nothing happened. I stood frozen, heart pounding. I wanted to walk away, pretend I hadn't heard. But then she said it. I think it's time we looked into a home. Somewhere she can be looked after. Not a discussion, a decision. There was no warmth in her tone. No concern. It was like she was talking about a leaky faucet. And my son, my boy, he didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He just nodded. I'll start looking. Quietly. She doesn't need to know yet. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood. They weren't talking to me. They were talking around me. Like I wasn't still in the house, still alive, still here, still me. I turned around, but not in defeat. I shuffled back to my room like a ghost. Quiet. Unnoticed. I closed the door slowly. Sat on the edge of my bed. Stared at the carpet with the little rose patterns that hadn't changed since the day I moved in. They were planning to send me away, to put me somewhere, to tuck me out of sight and out of life. But here's what they forgot. I wasn't gone yet. And if they thought I was going to sit back and let them take the rest of my life out from under me, they didn't know their mother. They didn't know this, Grandma. The next morning, I moved slower than usual, but not because I was tired. No, I was thinking, calculating. Every motion, every word, every look I gave was carefully weighed. I walked into the kitchen just as the coffee finished brewing. My daughter-in-law was there. She smiled at me, the same tight-lipped smile she always used when pretending. Morning, Nora. Want me to get you a cup? I nodded and smiled politely. I watched her pour it, pretending not to hear the tremble in her voice. They thought I didn't know, that I was still the sweet old woman knitting in the corner, humming to myself, talking to the cat who had died 2 years ago. But I had heard, and now I would watch. They talked. Softer. That day, my son came home from work earlier than usual. They whispered more. Closed doors they normally left open. And when I walked by the computer, I noticed a tab minimized quickly. I wasn't stupid. They were researching homes. Care facilities, they call them now. Assisted living. Memory units. I had heard of them. I had visited friends in some. I knew what they looked like: smiling nurses, polished brochures, pastel-colored walls, and eyes that always watched but never saw. I had no intention of ending up there. Not like that. I tested them that evening. After dinner, I faked confusion. I asked where the salt was something I had reached for every night for 10 years. My daughter-in-law didn't say anything, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. A mental tally mark, no doubt. Then I forgot the name of my favorite TV show, and when my grandson asked what year I was born, I paused for a full 10 seconds before replying, 1938, I think. I saw the way they looked at each other behind my back, like vultures in cardigans. They didn't know I was watching them watch me. I called Margaret. That night, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't in months. Margaret was my best friend for over 40 years. We raised our kids at the same time. We buried our husbands around the same time. We shared tears, recipes, and secrets. Nora, she answered. Is that really you? I need your help, I said, voice steady. They're planning to put me away, but I have a plan of my own. There was a pause. Then her voice lit up with that old stubborn fire. Tell me everything. My first step finding myself again. I pulled out my old notebook that night, the one I hadn't written in since Paul passed. I opened to a blank page and wrote in big, bold letters, "They think I'm fading, but I'm just getting started." I smiled to myself in the soft lamplight. Let them whisper. Let them plan. Because while they were organizing my removal, I was preparing my return. And I promise you this, I will not go quietly. The next morning, I looked in the mirror for a long time. Not to check my hair. Not to smooth out wrinkles that had earned their place. I looked because I needed to see myself again. The woman staring back was not frail. She had survived childbirth, widowhood, 2 jobs at once, and a cancer scare in 2002. She was not confused. She was remembering. The journal became my weapon. Every night I began writing what I called Operation Nora. I recorded everything they said around me, every mistake I pretended to make, every slip-up they didn't think I noticed. But more importantly, I wrote about me, not the me they saw, the real me. Today, I remembered the name of every street I've ever lived on, but I told them I couldn't recall my doctor's name. Let them make their little list. They think they're gathering evidence. So am I. And with every line, I felt the fog in my heart start to lift. Margaret had a contact. 2 days later, Margaret came to visit with a glint in her eye. She brought shortbread cookies and a plan. You remember Lou from church? His niece works for a legal firm that helps seniors with independence claims. I raised an eyebrow. Independence claims. If they try to move you against your will, and you're capable of self-care, you can fight it legally. It's more common than you think. I stared at her stunned. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just scared. I was being set up. And now, I wasn't alone. The test I wasn't supposed to know about. That night, I overheard it again. My son on the phone, whispering. Yeah, we're thinking of doing a small capacity assessment, just to see where she's at. But we won't tell her until it's scheduled. My hand shook. They were going to test me like I was broken. Like I was a machine being evaluated for parts. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just betrayal. This was a challenge. They wanted to measure my mind. Fine. I would show them exactly what it could do. But on my terms, the plan was growing. I knew I had to move fast. If they beat me to it, filed some paperwork, got doctors involved, I might lose my say. So I made 3 moves that night. I called Lou's niece and scheduled a consultation quietly. I gathered all my personal documents and stored them in a safe, undisclosed location. I made a copy of my house key and gave it to Margaret. Because if things went sideways, I was going to need an exit. They underestimated me. They thought I was old, forgetful, out of steam. But what they forgot is that a woman who has nothing left to prove has everything left to protect. The day started like any other. I watered the plants, folded towels, made tea, but something in the air had shifted. My daughter-in-law was on edge. She kept glancing at her phone, then at me. My son came home mid-morning, which never happened unless someone died or something big was being planned. I moved through the house like wallpaper, like furniture, and yet I felt more awake than I had in years because now I knew the truth. And I had a plan. The surprise visitor, at 2:14 p.m., the doorbell rang. A woman in a navy suit, clipboard in hand. My son smiled nervously. Hey, Mom, this is Teresa. She's just here to chat a bit. Nothing serious. My stomach turned. So this was it. The beginning of the end. A chat that would be used to build a case against me. An interview dressed as a cup of tea. I smiled. How nice. Please sit down. I've made lemon cake. Their mistake was assuming I'd crumble. Teresa asked questions gently, the way you speak to a child who might cry. Where I was born. What year it was. Who the president was. I answered flawlessly, throwing in trivia for good measure. And just for fun, I can name the last 5 governors of this state too. She blinked. Then she leaned in. Do you remember ever leaving the stove on? I raised an eyebrow. I remember you're a stranger in my home asking leading questions without telling me why. Do you remember who invited you? She flushed. My son interjected. Mom, please? No, I said calmly. Let's be honest. You're not here for tea. You're here to evaluate whether I'm still fit to exist outside 4 pastel-painted walls with a locked medication cabinet. Silence. Teresa scribbled something down. But I saw it in her eyes. This wasn't going the way they expected. The letter that was already in the mail, what they didn't know was that the night before, I had already mailed a notarized declaration of mental competency to Lou's niece, along with copies of my ID medical history and daily routines. What they didn't know was that the very act of bringing in an evaluator without my consent, that was documented too. And what they didn't know was that I had options. I wasn't cornered. I was preparing my escape, and every question Teresa asked me that day, I answered with poise, with clarity, with fire. My favorite part was the ending. At the end of the session, Teresa stood to leave. You're very articulate, Mrs. Bennett. I nodded. I always have been. Some people just stopped listening. As she walked out, my son wouldn't meet my eyes. My daughter-in-law muttered something about just trying to help. But help doesn't come with secret evaluations. Help doesn't look like betrayal in soft voices. And I wasn't going to wait around for their next move. I was already 3 steps ahead. Because now, it wasn't just about staying out of the home. It was about taking back my life. After Teresa left, I knew I had limited time. They wouldn't wait long. I had passed their little test, yes, but only barely in their minds. I could see it in their faces. They didn't believe the truth because they didn't want to. It was easier to imagine me declining than to accept that I was still fully here. That night, I marked a date on my calendar 2 weeks from that day, my personal Independence Day. And for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Margaret came through. Again, Margaret showed up with an envelope tucked inside her knitting bag. She handed it to me with the same casual air she used to bring over muffins. Inside was a set of keys. Unit 3B, clean, quiet, no stairs, and just enough room for one stubborn old lady and her books. I laughed, but I cried too. Not because I was sad, but because someone still believed I was worth the effort. Packing without raising alarm. I couldn't just leave suddenly. That would make them suspicious or worse, try to stop me. So I did what women have done for centuries. I worked quietly. I packed a little each day. A sweater here, a book there. I wrapped family photos in dish towels and tucked them into reusable grocery bags. Every night, I smuggled something small to Margaret's car when we went for evening walks. I made a list of every item that mattered. And more importantly, I made a list of the things I was finally ready to leave behind. What hurt the most? It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the sneaky evaluation. It wasn't even hearing them speak of me like I was already gone. What hurt was that they never asked. They never sat down and said, Mom, are you okay? What do you want? Are you lonely? Do you need more help around here? They just decided, like I was a problem to manage. A liability. A task. But I am not a checklist item on someone else's calendar. I am a woman, a mother, a grandmother, a life that built this very house. The moment that sealed it. A few days before my planned exit, I overheard my daughter-in-law again. I think we should move up the timeline. Maybe call that facility in Glenwood. The one with the secured doors. Secured doors. They were planning to trap me. And that's when I knew. I couldn't wait 2 weeks. I had to leave now. So that night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I snuck out. Slippers on, keys in hand, and one grocery bag with the last of my things. No goodbye. No note. Just a quiet locked door behind me. And the soft hum of freedom ahead. The street was silent. No cars, no porch lights. Just the sound of my own breath and the wheels of my suitcase brushing along the sidewalk. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I walked slowly, deliberately. Like I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head. And in many ways, I had. Every insult disguised as concern, every whisper behind closed doors, every time they overlooked me at the dinner table. It all led to this. I wasn't just walking away from a house. I was walking back to myself. Margaret was waiting. She pulled up right on time, headlights off, smile soft. You ready? She asked, as if we were teenagers sneaking out for the first time. More than ever, I said. She helped me into the car, tossed my bag in the back. Didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. That's the kind of friend she was. The kind that knows your silence better than most people know your voice. As we drove through the sleeping neighborhood, I looked out the window one last time. No lights turned on. No one noticed I was gone. And strangely, that made it easier. Unit 3B, my new kingdom. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The one-bedroom apartment was warm, clean, and smelled faintly of lavender. Margaret had already stocked the fridge. My books were on the shelf. My favorite blanket folded at the edge of the bed. I took off my shoes and stepped into the space barefoot. The carpet felt like a cloud, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light. You'll be safe here, Margaret whispered, placing a hand on my shoulder. I'm not looking for safety anymore, I said. I'm looking for space to breathe. And I finally had it. They didn't call. Not yet. The first night passed, then the second. By the third day, my phone buzzed. Missed calls, voicemails. Mom, where are you? This isn't funny. Please call us. We're worried. Nora, please, we just want to talk. But they didn't want to talk before. They only wanted to talk now that I was gone. Now that their plans had been disrupted. Now that the woman they thought they could handle had handled herself. I sent a letter. Instead, 3 days after I left, I mailed a letter. Just one. No apology, no address, just truth. I heard everything. You planned to put me away without asking. You discussed my life like it was paperwork. I am not confused. I am not forgetful. I am not yours to manage. I chose myself, finally. Mom, I didn't sign my full name. I didn't need to. They'd recognize the handwriting. They'd recognize the courage, even if it was the first time they truly saw it. They say when you remove yourself from toxicity, people don't miss you. They miss what you did for them. That became crystal clear in the days that followed. Voicemail after voicemail poured in, some pleading, some angry, some pretending to be confused, as if I had vanished without reason. Why would you do this to us? We were only trying to help. This is irresponsible, Mother. Ah, there it was. Not grief, not accountability. Control disguised as concern. But I didn't respond, because silence in its purest form is the language of boundaries, the strength of saying nothing. Every morning in my new apartment began the same way. I brewed my coffee. I sat near the window, and I chose. I chose peace. I chose independence. I chose to live deliberately, something I hadn't done since before Paul passed away. I began writing again, longhand, in ink. Stories, memories, thoughts I hadn't dared speak aloud in decades. One morning I wrote, they mistook my silence for senility, but I was never confused. I was just tired of being unheard. That entry became the cornerstone of my healing. Unexpected visitors. On the 7th day, there was a knock. I paused, heart skipping. Then I heard a voice I knew better than my own heartbeat. Grandma, it's me, Jack. My grandson. I opened the door slowly. There he stood tall and fidgety, holding a brown paper bag. I brought your favorite tea, the one with the little lavender bits. He looked down, shame in his voice. I didn't know they were talking about putting you away. I swear I didn't. I believed him. Because sometimes it's not the children who fail us. It's the adults raising them. What I told him. We sat at the table, 2 mugs between us, the air heavy but honest. I just wanted to visit, he said. Not to convince you to come back. Just to see if you're okay. I nodded. I'm more than okay, Jack. For the first time in years, I'm not just alive. I'm living. He nodded, eyes watery. Then he said something I'll never forget. I think I like this version of you. The one that doesn't whisper anymore. I smiled, because in that moment, I saw hope. Not in my son, not in my daughter-in-law, but in him. And that was enough. They didn't deserve a goodbye. When people plan your erasure, they don't deserve your farewell. And I had given enough of myself already. So I never called back, never returned, never explained. I didn't need to, because when you finally choose yourself, explanations are no longer required. just breathing, just existing, just being free. Something strange happens when you start over. The world looks different. The air feels lighter. You begin to notice small joys, how the sunlight hits the floor just right at 9 a.m., how the birds outside your window sing louder when no one is yelling over them. For the first time in decades, I wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's space. I was expanding into my own. I even bought myself a ridiculous red hat from the thrift store just because I liked it. And I wore it to the market like it was a crown. Because in a way it was. Margaret called it the Nora glow. She stopped by one afternoon with lemon bars and a knowing grin. "You're glowing," she said. "I haven't seen this version of you since 1983. I laughed. "It's because I'm no longer pretending." She raised her tea in a toast. "To freedom, at any age," and we clinked mugs. Two old women, battle-tested, brave, alive. I found my voice and gave others permission. Margaret introduced me to a women's circle at the local community center. It was mostly women over 60, some divorced, some widowed, some abandoned, all carrying stories that had never seen the light of day. I told them mine, about the ring, the whispers, the plan to lock me away, and the night I vanished like a ghost and rebuilt my life. When I finished, there were tears, but not the kind that sting. The kind that release. The letters I received. After that meeting, I began receiving letters. Notes slipped under my door. Folded pieces of paper handed off in grocery store aisles. "Your story gave me courage to speak up." I thought I was alone. They keep telling me I'm forgetful, but I remember every little hurt. Each one was a reminder. I hadn't just saved myself. I had started something, a quiet revolution, of women who refused to be erased. The house they called a home wasn't one anymore. I heard from my son once more. He sent a message through Jack. "He wants to know if you'll ever come back." I smiled gently. "Tell him I already did," came back Jack asked. "Yes," I said, to myself, because the only home I needed now was the one I was finally building inside me. And that kind of home they could never take. One morning, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. But this time, I didn't just see a face aged by years. I saw me. My eyes were clearer. My shoulders stood taller. My mouth, once drawn tight by decades of biting my tongue, now curved upward freely, even when no one was around. I ran my fingers across the frame and whispered, "There you are!" Because that woman in the glass, she had been waiting for me to come back. I started saying yes to going out for lunch with Margaret. Yes to reading poetry aloud in the women's circle. Yes to telling my story at the library open mic, even though my hands trembled as I turned each page. For years, I had been taught that old women should be quiet, polite, grateful to simply be present. But now I realized just being present isn't living. And saying yes to myself was the loudest no I could ever give to the ones who had tried to silence me. Then came the article. It started with a local reporter who had attended one of the story circles. She was young, empathetic, fierce. She asked if she could write about me, not just the escape, but the idea that women over 70 are often written off, medicated into passivity, tucked away into pastel rooms with bingo cards and silence. At first I hesitated, but then I remembered what it felt like to be talked about, but not to. And I said yes. The grandma who refused to disappear. That was the headline. It ran in the local paper and online. Within a week it was shared hundreds of times. Strangers started recognizing me at the market. Some clapped me on the back. Others just held my hand. A younger woman, maybe 40, told me, "My mother is going through something like this." Reading your story gave me the courage to call her and ask, "What do you want?" I hugged her. And in that moment, I realized what I had done wasn't just personal. It was universal. I was no longer just a story, I was a voice. A warning, a blueprint. Proof that freedom doesn't require youth, just choice. And the will to walk out of the door they never expected you to touch. And now, I was no longer hiding. I was leading. One Sunday morning, while watering the little balcony garden I had planted from scratch, I received a letter. Not an email, not a voicemail. A letter. Handwritten, shaky but sincere. It was from my son. "Mom, I don't know how to write this without sounding small. But I was wrong. We were wrong. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really protecting me from the guilt of not listening. I miss you. I don't know if we deserve to see you again, but I hope you'll let us try. I sat down, the watering can still in my hand, and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. Healing doesn't always come in straight lines. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit, because healing isn't something you rush into, especially when the wound was stitched with betrayal and sewn shut with silence. I reread the letter 3 times, and what moved me most wasn't the apology. It was the admission. He finally saw me, not as someone to manage, not as a burden, but as a person. The meeting on neutral ground. A week later, I agreed to meet. Not at their house, not at mine, but at a quiet cafe halfway between. Margaret came with me not as backup, but as a reminder that I wasn't walking in alone. They were already seated when we arrived. My son stood as I approached. His eyes were glassy, his shoulders slouched in shame. My daughter-in-law looked nervous, maybe even remorseful. Jack smiled the moment he saw me. What I told them at the table. "You didn't just plan to put me away," I said calmly. "You planned to erase my say in my own life. That's what hurt the most." They listened, really listened. And then my son said, "You're right. And I think maybe we started seeing you as someone fading because we didn't want to deal with the guilt of watching you change." I nodded. "I never needed you to stop the changes. I just needed you to walk through them with me." We didn't hug right away. This wasn't a movie. There was no dramatic embrace, but there was understanding, and that was enough. When I stood to leave, my son said, "You don't have to come back. Just don't disappear again." I smiled gently. I never disappeared. I simply went where I could be found. 2 weeks later, I returned to the house I had once called home. Not to stay, not to reclaim anything, but to see it one last time with new eyes. My son had invited me for a quiet lunch. No big gathering, no expectations. Just lunch. Margaret offered to come with me again, but I declined. "I need to do this one on my own," I told her. Because this wasn't just a visit. It was a crossing. From old grief into new ground. Stepping through that door, again, everything looked the same. The same coat rack. The same family portraits on the wall. The same chipped paint near the kitchen counter I had asked them to fix for years. But it didn't feel the same. Because I wasn't the same. I was no longer someone inside this house unsure if she was wanted. Now I was a visitor. And visitors have power. Because they choose when to arrive and when to leave. The quiet over the table. We ate in the dining room. Chicken salad. My son remembered I liked extra dill. There wasn't much small talk. Just careful words like stones placed gently across a broken bridge. "We kept your room the same?" he said. "That wasn't necessary," I replied. "I'm not coming back." Not cold, just clear. And to his credit, he didn't argue. He nodded. "I understand." And this time, I believed him. The box on the bed, before I left, Jack pulled me aside. "I saved something," he whispered. He led me to the bedroom where a small box sat on the bed. Inside, a photograph, me and Paul on our wedding day. And beside it, tucked carefully in a velvet pouch, my wedding ring. "I bought it back," he said. "Sold my old gaming system and some sneakers. It's not the same one, but it's the closest I could find." I held it in my hands for a long moment. Then I smiled. "You didn't buy back the ring, Jack. You gave me something better." "What's that?" he asked. A reason to believe again. I left that day with empty hands, full heart. I didn't take anything with me. Not the ring, not the photos, not even the books I had left behind. I had no need for souvenirs because the only thing I came to reclaim was respect. And that was already mine again. Back in my little apartment, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and stared at the soft light filtering through the curtains. The ring Jack gave me sat on the windowsill. I didn't wear it, not because I didn't value it, but because I didn't need to anymore. It wasn't the symbol that gave me strength. It was the choice behind it. The fact that someone finally saw me as a person worth making right with. The journal that became a guidebook. I opened my old notebook that evening and reread everything from the beginning. Every quiet fury. Every line of pain, resilience, and resolve. And for the first time, I didn't cry. I understood this was no longer just a personal log of survival. It was a manual for every woman, who had ever sat at the corner of her own life, shrinking into invisibility. So I made copies. I called it The Day I Heard Them, planned my ending, and wrote a new beginning instead. I printed 10 copies and brought them to the women's circle. The letters started pouring in. Again. This time, they didn't come from friends. They came from strangers, older women, younger women, even men. Your words gave me the courage to move out of my daughter's basement. I'm 72. I haven't spoken to anyone in weeks. Until I saw your story. You made me believe that being old doesn't mean being done. Each letter stitched something new into me. Not pride, but purpose. Because now I wasn't just surviving. I was leading. A library reading, then a standing ovation. The librarian at the community center invited me to do a public reading. It might only be 10 people, she warned. But when I stood behind that little podium, 30 folding chairs were full. I wore the red hat. I read from my journal. When I got to the line, they whispered plans to erase me. So I wrote myself back into the world. There was silence. And then applause. Loud, raw, real. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a forgotten grandmother. I felt like a lighthouse. Jack came to every reading after that. He sat quietly in the back notebook in hand. One day he said, "I'm writing my own story now." "Good," I told him. "Don't wait until you're 81 to realize your voice matters." He nodded, and I knew whatever they tried to erase in me, I had already passed forward something unerasable. A call came from a local university. A women's studies professor had read the article and asked if I would speak to her class. She said they were exploring themes of autonomy, aging, and the societal invisibility of older women. "You don't have to prepare a lecture," she said. "Just tell them the truth. Tell them what it feels like to be unheard." I laughed softly. "Oh, I've got years of material." The auditorium wasn't packed, but it didn't need to be maybe 50 students. Some scribbling in notebooks, others scrolling on phones. I had assumed they'd be polite and forget me 5 minutes later. But as I started sharing my story about the whispers behind my back, the plan to remove me without asking, and the night I chose my own path, their eyes lifted. Phones disappeared. Pens stopped. They listened, really listened. And when I said, "You are never too old to choose yourself again. You are never too late to say no and mean it," there were tears. Even from the professor, a question that stopped me cold. After my talk, a young woman raised her hand. "If you could go back and tell your younger self anything, what would it be?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because the answer had taken me a lifetime to live into. I'd tell her, "You are not selfish for having boundaries. You are not dramatic for demanding respect. And if they call you difficult, you're probably doing something right." The room was quiet. And then one by one, they clapped. Slowly at first, then together. Not for the woman on stage, but for the girl I used to be. I became a mentor. Without trying to, over the following weeks, emails came in from students. Some just said thank you. Others shared how they had stood up to a controlling parent, walked away from a toxic relationship, or started keeping a journal of their own thoughts, something they hadn't done since they were kids. I didn't respond to them all, but I read every single word, because in their voices I heard my own, only younger. And I realized I wasn't just teaching, I was planting. And those seeds, they were growing. The ring still sat on my windowsill. I still hadn't worn it. Not once. But every morning I looked at it as I sipped my tea, not because I needed to remember what was taken, but because I needed to remember what I reclaimed. It wasn't a piece of gold. It was my voice, and no one could ever sell that again. One evening, I sat by the window with a pen in hand and wrote a letter to my younger self. I didn't plan to send it anywhere, of course, but something inside me needed to say it out loud on paper, where it couldn't be erased or whispered over. "Dear Nora, they will underestimate you. They will confuse your kindness for weakness, your quiet for emptiness, your aging for fading. But one day you will rise. Not with fury, but with the kind of clarity that makes others tremble. You will walk away from what they built for you and build something better. You won't get your ring back, but you'll find your fire. And girl, It will light everything. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it inside the back of my notebook. I didn't need to look at it again. Just writing it was enough. Jack surprised me again. He came by one morning with a box. Not too big. Inside was a collection of printed stories. Mine. Bound in soft covers. I printed your journal, he said, eyes hopeful. I thought other people should read it. Maybe in libraries, maybe online. I didn't change a word. I opened it and stared at the title he gave it. I heard them plan to put me in a home, so I took my life back. I laughed, then cried. Not because I was sad, but because someone finally took my words seriously enough to publish them. Margaret held the first copy like a treasure. Look at you, she said, flipping through it. From invisible to immortal. We both laughed, then sat quietly with the weight of what that meant. It wasn't fame I wanted. It wasn't recognition. It was witnessing, to be seen before being gone. To leave not just a memory, but a map. My son came to the book launch. I hadn't expected him. He sat in the back, quiet, respectful. After the reading, he waited until the room cleared. Then he walked up to me, holding a copy of the book. I've read it twice, he said. And I don't expect forgiveness, Mom. But I finally understand why you had to leave. I nodded. You don't have to be forgiven, I said. Just be different moving forward. And for the first time, I think he truly meant it. Not to impress me, but to become better. That night I wore the ring, not because I needed it, but because I was no longer wearing it for memory. I was wearing it for victory. The morning of my 82nd birthday, I woke up to birdsong outside the window and a vase of wildflowers left at my door. No note, no signature, just beauty. And that I realized was the new rhythm of my life. Unexpected peace, gentle kindness, earned joy. I wasn't someone waiting to be remembered anymore. I was someone who had written herself into memory. The celebration I never knew I needed, Margaret planned a small gathering at the community center. Friends from the women's circle came, former students from the university, even the local librarian who had once offered me a podium and folding chair. And Jack, he brought a cake. He lit every candle with careful hands. He made a speech I'll never forget. My grandma didn't just escape a house, she reclaimed her home, not in bricks and walls, but in voice and choice, in legacy. The final page of the notebook. That night, after everyone had gone home and the laughter still echoed in my ears, I sat by my window with my journal. I turned to the last blank page, and I wrote, they tried to make plans for my ending. But I rewrote the entire story. I wasn't placed in a home. I found mine inside myself. And in doing so, I became a home for others too. I closed the journal and smiled, not because the story was finished, but because I had finally finished it on my terms. The final message to you. If you're reading this and you feel invisible, if they've told you you're too old, too forgetful, too fragile, I want you to know, you are still here. You are still you. And you still have chapters left to write. You don't need permission, only courage. And maybe, just maybe, a red hat to remind the world. I was never meant to disappear quietly.